The house at the end of Blackgrove Lane did not look evil. It was simply old. A Victorian fossil with flaking paint and windows like cataract-filled eyes sinking into the damp earth. For Alara, a freelance archivist, it was a professional challenge, not a tomb. The new owners, a young couple fleeing the city's noise, had hired her to sort through the mountains of papers and curios left by the reclusive previous owner, a woman named Agnes Blackwood. The air inside was thick with the smell of dust, decay, and dried lavender. It was in the library, behind a shelf of water-stained botanical journals, that Alara found the false panel. Her fingers, skilled at sensing the texture of aged paper, found the seam. Behind it was a small, light-lined box, cold to the touch, even in the stifling heat of the house. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded black velvet, was a single object, a spool of film. It was old, 8 millimeters, the celluloid brittle and faintly smelling of ozone and something else. The faint, sweet temps of bog water. There was no label. A projector sat under a dust sheet in the corner of the study as if waiting for her. A compulsion, cold and insistent, settled in her mind. She had to see what was on it. The rational part of her, the archivist, argued this was a terrible breach of protocol. The curious, primal part 1. As the projector's lamp flickered to life, casting a grainy monochrome image onto the bare wall, Alara's breath caught. The footage was jarring, nonsensical, close-up of an eye wide with terror. The stone interior of a well, moss-slick and dark. A woman's hands chapped and raw, weaving a complex pattern from reeds a small, ugly doll. A symbol, 3 spirals connected by a single line carved into a piece of dark wood. The images were punctuated by bursts of static that sounded like frantic whispering. The final shot was the clearest. A young girl, perhaps 7 or 8, standing in a sun-dappled grove. She was beautiful, with pale hair and a simple white dress. But her expression was ancient, devoid of any light. She stared directly into the camera, and then slowly she raised a hand and pointed, not at the lens but at something behind it. The film ended with a screech of tearing celluloid. The room plunged into darkness. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. The air temperature had dropped precipitously, and from somewhere deep within the house, a new sound echoed. A steady, rhythmic drip. Drip like water falling into a deep stone basin. That was the first night the reflection changed. Exhausted, she went to the small bathroom to wash her face. She cupped the cold water, splashed it on her skin, and looked up into the mirror. For a fraction of a second, standing directly behind her, was the girl from the film. White dress was soaked, her hair plastered to her skull. Dark water streaming from her pores and pooling at her feet on the checkered linoleum. Her eyes were black pits. Lara spun around, a scream trapped in her throat. The room was empty. But on the floor, where the apparition had stood, a small puddle of dark, murky water slowly seeped into the ground. The horror did not announce itself with jump scares. It seeped, it corrupted. The dripping sound became a constant in her life, a metronome counting down to an unknown end. She found damp footprints, small and barefoot, leading from the unused basement door to her makeshift bed. She woke, with her mouth tasting of peat and stagnant water, strands of pale, wet hair tangled in her fingers. The blood came next. It started subtly. A single, perfect drop of crimson welling from the bathroom tap instead of water. Then, one morning, she opened the box where she'd stored the film canister. It was filled to the brim with blood, the spool floating in the viscous, coppery-smelling liquid. When she recoiled, slamming the lid shut, she felt a sharp, stinging pain on her forearm. 3 parallel scratches, deep and weeping, had appeared on her skin, as if made by a small, furious hand. Her sanity began to fray like the edges of the cursed film. Sleep was impossible. Every shadow held the shape of the girl. Every sound was her sodden footsteps. Lara tried to destroy the film. She took a kitchen knife to the celluloid, but the blade turned in her hand, slicing her own palm open. She tried to burn it in the fireplace, but the flames guttered and died as if doused, leaving the film unscathed. She knew with a cold, absolute certainty that the girl wanted out. The film was a prison, and Alara had become the door. On the 7th night, the power died. The dripping in the walls grew louder, becoming a torrent, a cascade. Water began to seep under the doors, rising rapidly, an inch deep, then two. It was ice cold and smelled of the grave. A flickering light drew her to the study. The projector was running by itself, the torn film looping its horrific imagery onto a wall, now streaked with water and something darker. The girl's image was clearer now, her features twisted into a rictus of rage and longing. Ilara backed away, her feet slipping in the rising water, which was now tinged pink. The water in the hallway was up to her knees. Standing at the end of the hall, illuminated by a crack of lightning from a storm that wasn't there, was the girl. She was no longer a reflection or a glimpse. She was corporeal, real. Water poured from her in sheets. From her black eyes crawled tiny, wriggling things that fell into the flood with soft plinks. She began to walk toward Ilara, each step a struggle against the current she herself was creating. The air grew frigid. The whispered static from the film now had a voice, a chorus of drowned voices pleading from a single small mouth. "Let me in," it gurgled. There was nowhere to run. The water was at Ilara's waist, pulling her down, its current impossibly strong. She was cold, so cold. The girl was inches away, reaching out a hand that was both childlike and skeletal. The touch was like immersion in a frozen lake. The last thing Ilara saw was the girl's face merging with her own in the dark, water-blurred surface of a window. The last thing she felt was a terrible, invasive cold flooding her mind, silencing her thoughts, drowning her from the inside out. The last thing she heard was a final, satisfied whisper in her own voice. "I'm in." The police found the house dry and silent 3 days later. Ilara was gone. The only clues were the projector, sitting cold in the study, a single, deep scratch mark on the floorboards, and the light-lined box, sitting open and empty on the desk. The case was never solved. A week later, the young couple who owned the house received a package in the mail, no return address. Inside was a single spool of 8mm film. There was no note. Intrigued and unaware of the horror it contained, the husband set up the old projector in the study after dinner. As the first grainy images flickered onto the wall, a steady dripping began somewhere in the walls of the old house. A small, wet footprint materialized on the clean floor behind him. The wellspring had found a new vessel,